experience and revealed knowledge. When Baha'u'llah, over a century ago, wrote these words for the world, predicting that in the future world society there will be a fusion and harmony between science and religion, I'm sure for the world at that time, in such a world society, science and religion, the two most potent forces in human life, will be reconciled, will cooperate, and will harmoniously develop. But we were at that time very far away from this goal, and we still are, because great changes have to take place. On the same topic of harmony between science and religion, says, when religion, I have highlighted certain parts in yellow so that you will be your attention will be drawn to this. Abdul Baha says, when religion, shorn of its superstitions, traditions, and unintelligent dogmas, shows its conformity force in the world, which will sweep before it all wars, disagreements, discords, and struggles, and then will mankind be united. The reason why I highlighted those words in yellow was to indicate that Abdul Baha is telling us that it's religion that has to change in order to become conforming with mind, because of course it's the people who practice the religion, therefore they have to change. There has always been throughout history an uneasy truce between the two knowledge systems, the knowledge system of science and the knowledge system of religion. And this has been particularly characteristic of Western history, because between periods of time when they have been in mutual support of one another and other times where they have really been bitter enemies. Science has traditionally asked empirical questions like, how did this happen? Where does it come from? Or what is it actually? Whereas religion has confronted the spiritual. But we have to remember that science is not necessarily objective. It's only practiced by scientists, and scientists are human beings. So, like everyone else, they are unconsciously reflecting in their theories and in their interpretations of their findings the social and political constraints of their times. And thereon who knows, in future there may be other discoveries that will be made which will make truth appear differently than what we know it today. And we have to bear that in mind. It's always relative to where we are in history. This is a picture by William Blake showing the moment when God created the universe. This is approximately 6,000 years ago, God created this universe as the Bible suggests that it transpired. And this tradition of God at a particular moment creating the universe has been with us for centuries and for millennia. But there have been, over the periods of time, scientific discoveries and scientific the universe. And there's not enough time to be able to highlight each one of them, but perhaps some of the most important scientific advances that have been made have in some ways challenged this view, but in other ways also been consistent with it. For example, Charles Darwin, in his book The Descent of Man, published in 1871, proposed the idea that in fact man extent if you take it at its face value, in the sense of evolution being very, very primary and then gradually evolving into a complex system such as ours. Again, Rezvan has already talked about Albert Einstein and how through his discoveries he came to the conclusion that in fact you need both scientific discoveries and divinity in order to be able to have true understanding. His groundbreaking theory of relativity, which was advanced in 1916, actually was the basis of his own understanding that science without religion is lame, and religion without science is blind. Another major of a creator is Big Bang cosmology. George Gamow in 1948 proposed that the universe began in a primeval explosion. This idea that an instantaneous creation came about leaves open the possibility that there was a creator to have brought it about. So this is consistent with a particular instant. To the extent that popular journals like Newsweek and Time magazine reflect popular opinion, all of these types of approaches towards the understanding of science, our understanding of the universe, and how it jives with regards to religious belief, this copy of Newsweek was actually published in 1998, and the cover story read that scientists finally find God because of their endeavors to try and understand the universe and the cosmos and how it was put together and how it operated, this perfect system that Abdu'l-Baha refers to so often in his writings. And there gradually emerged an era because for a growing number of scientists, the very discoveries of modern science about the cosmos, about the human genome, and about evolutionary biology, they offered support for spirituality and hints about the very nature of God. It was predicted that this would actually go the other way. In fact, the two poles would become even further the less they realized they had understood. And that made them a little bit humble. So there was an increasing awareness among scientists. For example, we started seeing physicists such as Stephen Hawking, who's clearly regarded as the greatest physicist living today, saying things like Big Bang cosmology may reveal background radiation represents the handwriting of God. And from the cosmos, some scientists, particularly neuroscientists, turned towards themselves, their own self, and started investigating the universe within each one of us. This is a picture that was taken of an iceberg from an oil rig. Deep within the iceberg and symbolically within each one of us. But then, once again, scientists do have a tendency to become very arrogant very quickly. And as technology advanced and technological advances meant that we were given tools with which to look at the most divine part of us, namely religion anymore, because we could find God in the brain anyway. So we could get a direct route via MRIs in particular into the brain. So this next cover of Newsweek, which appeared in early 2000, actually asked the question, does science make religion unnecessary now that we have all this technology? But beneath recognize that there really was such a phenomena as metaphysical experience. And they hoped that through this technology, they would be able to understand a little bit about the roots of this metaphysical experience and how it was represented in the brain. So we started seeing in scientific publications pictures of the and either looking at religious scriptures or looking at pictures of Christ, for example, on the cross, or listening to church music, or having various symbols that were religiously associated, and looking at the different pattern of activity in the brain. And then the conclusion being further. So, and then we went even deeper. This was published, this cover of Time magazine goes back to 2004, late 2004, when we even went deeper into the brain by looking at the molecular level, asking the question, is God actually encoded into our genes so that we have no choice? And I thought this picture showing the DNA at the moment of creation being put into man as very apt, because this is really what the question is asking. Do we have the capacity encoded into our genome to strive to understand God within us? And of course, this phrase has actually been taken from man, which is exactly what Rezwan was talking about when he read from some of the Baha'i passages indicating that the scientific endeavor was in fact instilled in the human being, and only in the human being. So there's now a truly active dialogue between scientists and people of religion. Perhaps the most influential scientific journal, reported that approximately 40% of working physicists and biologists actually hold strong spiritual beliefs. Scientists have now come out of their closets and are increasingly willing to discuss their spiritual beliefs in public. Major universities such as Princeton, Harvard, Cambridge, and there are now international scientific meetings that are being held on the topics of consciousness, self, and the soul. Even a decade ago, no self-respecting scientist dared to stand up at a scientific meeting and talk about these phenomena. They thought that their science would be jeopardized by even entertaining the idea. And very interesting for me is the fact that the Dalai Lama of Tibet is due to lecture at the Society for Neuroscience on meditation and its role in society. And this is the 35th annual meeting of the Society for Neuroscience, which is attended by approximately 25,000 neuroscientists. And for the first time, in neuroscience. So you see, things are changing. Now we turn to some of the writings of Abdu'l-Baha on the relationship between the brain, the mind, and the spirit, because of course what I have presented to you is how the scientists view these topics. But in the Baha'i writings, Abdu'l-Baha clearly states by referring to it as an organ, he really opens the way for this organ to be explored scientifically so that we understand how it works. And of course, we really don't know how it works. We're only beginning to get glimpses of it. He then goes on to say that intellectual power is not located within the brain, but it only has a connection with it. or this drive towards understanding inside the brain, they are clearly wrong. Abdu'l-Baha goes on to say that the mind that finally neuroscientists have acknowledged that it exists, it has no place, but it is connected with the brain. And finally, the connection of the spirit with the body uses very often in describing the relationship between the mind, the brain, and the spirit. He uses the analogy of a lamp shedding light, and he also uses the analogy of the sun and the mirror. Now, we neither understand the working of the lamp nor of the mirror, because these are really the references to the brain. Is really what we're interested in studying. And that, Abdu'l-Baha tells us, has no place, but it is connected with this organ. So there is one reality manifesting in different ways, manifesting different powers. Again, quoting from Abdu'l-Baha, he says, reality, all sciences, arts, and inventions become known and manifest. Whatever thou beholdest of the works of man is but a faint ray of that reality. I should have emphasized that. It's only a shadow of that reality that we're getting a glimpse of. The human spirit is the discoverer of things. The brain is only a channel. So humans are in fact the exceptional beings. In the world of creation, humans are unique because they're spiritual beings. It's the spiritual nature of man that allows him to aspire, to discover. It's the spirit that enlightens the human mind and inspires, and this is a phrase from Abdu'l-Baha, we look at this drive that is within us as a spiritually driven drive, then the higher cognitive functions that come from the brain or are made possible by the activity of the brain could be seen as reflections of each person's unique spiritual endowment. So, what are to the animal spirits that we share with animals? In addition, we have 5 spiritual powers, or he refers to them as inner powers. These are imagination, which conceives things; thought, which reflects upon realities; comprehension, which comprehends realities; thinks and comprehends; and the common faculty, which communicates between the outward and inward powers. Now, I can tell you that neuroscience has not even begun to understand the neural basis of imagination, of thought, of comprehension, or even of memory. We're getting or for that matter, how thought works or how imagination works. But when these faculties actually are working together, energized by the soul, we each individually experience a feeling of oneness with all that exists around us, and that is a reflection of our spiritual endowment. And this is, again, another passage from Abdu'l-Baha talking about the growth and development of the human race, because we have not always been the same way. Abdu'l-Baha says that man from the beginning possessed the capacity and aptitude for acquiring material and spiritual perfections, and was the manifestations of these words. He has only become more pleasing, more beautiful, and more graceful. Civilization has brought him out of his wild state. Well, how did this all happen? We know that once we were not alone on this earth, and there were other species that existed that were human-like or Homo sapien-like. On top of that, these are fossils that have been found of different types of hominid species, and we are the sole survivor of these tree or bush or whatever you want to call it. We sitting up here, the Homo sapiens. The human family is within it. Some people theorize that it's in the form of a tree and different branches have intermixed together to give rise to Homo sapiens, again sitting at the top on the left-hand side of the screen. Others think that it's more like a bush, with some of the ones that were less destined and able to cope with changes having died out, and the Homo sapiens again. Or a bush, the fact of the matter remains that all these other species that were related to us have died out, and we Homo sapiens have survived. Now, is that because of our spiritual endowment or our ability to have adapted to our environment in such a way to be able to bring it under control? I have to apologize for this slide because the title of it is "Where Did We Come From?" And it shows a, maybe I should do this with a cursor so that you can see it better. It's postulated that sometime approximately 7.5 million years ago, on the top of the screen, and it's shown here by these two solid black lines that we see continuing and ending with the gorilla and the chimpanzee. Now, they seem to have changed very little over this past 7.5 million years that we know the line separated. All the other species that you see here are basically gentleman standing over there is the latest find. He was discovered in East Africa, and his name is Tomei, and Tomei is supposed to be our great ancestor. Now, he's dated to approximately 7 million years ago, shortly after our human lineage separated from the apes. To say that we have actually changed a lot over time in our physical form, and that's exactly what Abdul Baha says may have happened. When we look at our ancestor, we see that he was actually more ape-like than human-like. For example, these features that you see here shown in red refer to the size of his skull, that of a chimp, but he had a very prominent brow, which suggests that he was probably a male, and the lower part of his face is very flat, which is characteristic of the Homo sapien, the hominid species that emerged later. So he had the potential to become a hominid. And there are other features as well that suggest that he really was, even though his similarity physically was more to the ape than to us. But perhaps one of the most significant things is that the base of his skull, which is where the vertebral column connects with the brain and the skull, was actually situated in such a way which suggests that he was walking and he was upright and he was looking forward. Now, this ability to be able to walk thing, you can see the horizon and you can see the sun rising and going down, which puts all kinds of thought about where you came from and where you're going to go eventually. Recently, they have used computer simulation in order to put a face onto this skull. And this is what our ancestor looked like. And this is what probably our... See, we did look much more like apes than we did like humans in those days. But we did become modern humans. And many scientists are now interested in knowing exactly what were the factors that gave rise to us as modern humans. As I mentioned, upright walking was one of them, because it's certainly important to free your hands so that you would be able to explore your environment and to be that we appeared somewhere along the line, and it seems to have been genetically regulated, to have developed big brains relative to the apes. And the third factor is, by having our hands liberated, we were able to start making tools. This is not to say that monkeys don't use tools. They do actually fashion very rude. The formation of our hands allows us to do, which is far beyond what a monkey can do. And then something very important seems to have happened in the human lineage, and that is that we developed the capacity for gestures, symbolic gestures, and the faculty of speech. And finally, we seem to have developed modern minds, and we'll see what that means in a minute. Until the discovery of Tomei, Lucy was the oldest ancestor that we had. She's dated to approximately 3.18 million years ago. And as you can see, her skeleton clearly shows that she was an upright, walking ancestress. And she was discovered also in Africa, in Ethiopia. As early as 7 million years ago, we now go on to looking at bigger brains. As I mentioned before, there appears to be a number of genes that are regulating brain growth, but whichever one was responsible for this explosion that took place, we don't know. When exactly it happened, we don't know. But the fact of the matter is that even after you have corrected, in total is 40% larger than that of our next of kin on the phylogenetic scale, which is the chimp. But certain regions of the brain, in particular the cortex, is 200 times larger and more complicated than that of the chimp. So there's something going on that's very special in the human brain. Requires this opposition of the thumb and the index finger. This gives us tremendous flexibility for the range of movements that you see down below on the screen, with us being able to do fine precision movements very rapidly. You can see on the top the chimpanzee hand. The separation between the index finger and the thumb is such that their tool-making ability tremendously. Even if they had the tool-making ability because they had the formation of the hand, they still would have had to have the drive in order to do tool-making, which is something else that they do not possess as well as we do. So these are some of the ancient tools that have been found, and they all date back to a long, long time ago, 2.5 million. Approximately 300,000 years ago for the tools that you see on the right-hand side of the screen. So these are really old relics of the tools that our ancestors used for hunting. Now we look at the period when human beings their remains were discovered in Africa actually started emanating out of Africa and spreading all over. you see at the bottom of the screen is showing you where remains of Homo sapiens have actually been found in different regions, or hominids have been found in different regions of the world. In particular, we see, for example, in Beijing, there have been very solid evidence found, but also in many other parts of Europe and Africa. We are now talking in hundreds of thousands of years rather than in millions of years. And we come to an explosion in the human population that seemed to have taken place around 100,000 to 200,000 years ago, when modern humans spread very rapidly across the world. And there is some suggestion gestures symbolically. Again, this is a very important development of that has been featured in the human race. In the Bible it says, in the beginning there was the Word. So all things appear to have started with the word that was uttered. Speech and language are regarded as the vehicle of the human mind. We may be thinking things, it's the vehicle through which we share our thoughts with others. And I thought that it was particularly revealing, this poem, eyesight and speech they wrought, for the veil of the soul therein. So speech is actually a tool through which the soul can communicate. I called this the secret of our gene. Enables the development of speech and language in the human brain is encoded uniquely into the human genome. And this is one of the wonders of the Human Genome Project that was completed at the turn of this century. The gene that's implicated in this fantastic ability that we all possess, the ability to communicate with one another, is a control gene. It's a forkhead gene, and it's dominantly inherited. We each carry 2 copies of this gene. One of them we have inherited from our mothers, and the other one from our fathers. And the 2 of them, when they're in working order, one of them dominates, and we are invested then with the ability to speak. This gene is found in the being, but obviously in the brain of the human being, it does something magical. It maps our thoughts onto our speech, onto our utterances. It is very strongly expressed in several regions of the body, but in particular in the brain. On the left-hand side, you see an embryonic brain. On the right-hand side, a mature brain. So the machinery to set up the capacity for developing articulate speech is actually encoded into our genome right from the very beginning. But it is also encoded into the brain of the mouse. We'll see in a minute. This slide shows the comparison